The recording starts mid-breath. That is the first thing archivist Ven Solaris notes when she pulls the file, not the content of the signal, not the coordinates, not the mathematical structure that had taken 3 of her colleagues 4 rotations to partially decode. The first thing she notices is that the signal begins mid-breath, as though whoever sent it had already been speaking for a long time before they remembered to press record. She plays it again. Static. Then something wet and biological and almost rhythmic. Then a voice, one single voice, saying 11 words in a language that does not exist in any catalog maintained by the hegemony of Joined Worlds, which maintains 4,400 catalogs. She does not know what the words mean. What she knows is this: the signal was not sent to humanity. It was sent to the Vol, and somehow, inexplicably, impossibly, humanity answered it first. The Vol had been dying for 60 years before they sent the signal. Not dramatically, not in the way that younger civilizations imagined extinction, no invasion, no catastrophe, no single terrible moment. The Vol died the way most species die, slowly, administratively, with a great deal of paperwork filed in the correct order. Their star was entering a phase the astrophysicists called terminal radiance expansion, and everyone else called the end. In 60 years, perhaps 80 if projections were optimistic, and they never were, the Vol homeworld would become uninhabitable. Not destroyed, just uninhabitable. There is a difference, and the Vol, being a deeply precise civilization, insisted on the distinction even as it ceased to matter. They had resources. They had time. What they did not have was a world to move to. The hegemony had rules about planetary resettlement. 7,214 rules, to be precise. The Vol had submitted the correct applications in the correct format to the correct administrative bodies and received back the correct rejections in the correct format, citing the correct regulatory clauses. The process was working exactly as designed. The Vol were simply running out of the one resource the process could not account for, so they did something unprecedented in their 60,000 years of recorded history. They asked for help, not from the hegemony, not from their trading partners or their treaty-bonded allies. They aimed their signal at a dead relay station in the outer arm of the hegemony's territorial boundary, a frequency so old it had been decommissioned before most current member species had achieved spaceflight, and they broadcast a single message, looped, on a rotating cipher that should have taken decades to crack. They aimed it at the old station because the old station was close to a world the hegemony had catalogued but never formally incorporated. A world with a breathable atmosphere, liquid water, complex biology, and as of the last census taken 40 years ago, a nascent spacefaring species that had not yet developed the technology to hear transmissions on this frequency. The signal was not meant for that species. The signal was meant to pass through that system and reach the Vol's only remaining ally, a small civilization called the Dravathi who lived 2 light years beyond. The Dravathi had a ship. The Vol needed a ship. This was going to be a private arrangement. Humanity received the signal in 18 days. The Dravathi, the intended recipients, never received it at all. Archivist Ven Solaris has been studying humanity for 6 years. She is considered, within her department, to be the closest thing to an expert on the species, a distinction that carries less prestige than it might sound, because the department is small, and the species is new, and very few serious researchers have chosen to specialize in what most of the hegemony still categorizes as a developmental observation subject rather than a full member civilization. She has read every filed report on human behavior. She has reviewed the contact logs, the trade dispute transcripts, the incident reports. She has watched the sensor footage from the border crossing at Meridian Station, where a human trader once spent 11 hours arguing with a customs official over a tariff discrepancy of 40 credits. 11 hours for 40 credits. The customs official had eventually recalibrated the tariff simply to make the argument stop, which Ven Solaris found professionally interesting for reasons she had not yet fully articulated. She is the one who gets the call when humanity's response to the Vol signal is decoded. She is sitting in her office when her communicator activates. Her colleague Thresh Anav, junior archivist, recently transferred from the Border Studies Division, appears on screen looking like he has not slept, which for a Coloth means his secondary respiratory membranes have gone pale and flat. "You should see this," he says. "Send it. I think you should see it in person." She looks at him for a moment. Thresh Anav is not dramatic. He once filed a report about witnessing a trade vessel explode using language so measured it read like a weather summary. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, she says. She is there in 4. The decoded response sits on the central display. It is not long. Human transmissions rarely are, which has always struck Ven Solaris as strange for a species that, by all behavioral observation, appears constitutionally incapable of brevity in any other context. The response is 43 words. She reads it 3 times. "What does it mean?" Thresh Anav asks. "I don't know," she says. It decoded a rotating cipher that our analysts estimated would take decades. "I know. In 18 days. I know." She reads it a 4th time. The 43 words sit on the screen perfectly translated by the hegemony's language systems, which means the grammar is correct, the vocabulary is accurate, and yet the message remains entirely opaque. Not because the words are wrong, because the words should not be in the sequence they are in, arranged the way they are arranged, saying what they appear to be saying. Message in full is this: "We heard you. We know what it costs to ask. We are not the ones you called, but we are the ones who came. Tell us what you need. We have been in the dark a long time too. We know how to move in it." The people on the 3rd planet, Thresh Anav speaks first. They know the signal wasn't meant for them. "Yes. How?" Ven Solaris does not answer. That is the first question, the one that will keep her awake for 11 days. Not what humanity said, but how humanity knew. The Vol's signal was directional. It was aimed precisely. Nothing in its mathematical structure should have indicated that it was not intended for the receiver. The only way to know the signal was misdirected would be to already know where it was actually going. And humanity could not possibly know that, which means something else is happening. Something Ven Solaris does not yet have the vocabulary to describe. The hegemony's response to humanity's unauthorized interception of a private encrypted Vol transmission is exactly what Ven Solaris expects. A formal inquiry, 3 subcommittees, a preliminary finding of procedural concern, and a directive that the matter be monitored but not escalated pending further review. What she does not expect is the Vol's response. They reply to humanity directly, within 6 hours. No subcommittees, no formal inquiry. No preliminary finding of anything. The Vol reply is 4 words. "How did you know?" Humanity takes 9 hours to respond. Later, Ven Solaris will learn that the 9-hour delay was not due to technical limitations or deliberation at the governmental level. It was because the human who received the Vol response, a signals analyst named Elena Vasquez, working a night shift at a deep space monitoring station on the edge of the solar system, initially did not believe it was real. She ran 17 diagnostic checks. Then she walked to the break room, made a cup of something hot, sat down, walked back, ran 4 more diagnostics, and then, apparently satisfied, began composing a reply using what her shift log describes simply as her personal judgment, because there was no protocol for this situation. There was no protocol because no one had imagined this situation could exist. The reply Elena Vasquez sends, officially now, the first direct human communication with an alien civilization in a context of mutual acknowledgement, is not a diplomatic document. It is not reviewed by a committee. It is not translated by a specialist. It is 31 words in plain language, and it will be studied by hegemony analysts for years. We know what a message looks like when someone is hoping the wrong person hears it. We've sent a few of those ourselves. "What do you need and how much time do you have?" Ven Solaris reads the Vasquez transmission 4 times. Then she pulls Elena Vasquez's personnel file. The file is thin. Signals analyst, mid-career, 2 commendations for attention to detail, 1 notation of irregular initiative that had been flagged and then unflagged and then apparently forgotten about. No special diplomatic training, no xenolinguistics background, not a senior official, not a government representative. Not anyone who was supposed to be making first contact with a dying civilization, a person who was working the night shift, who made a hot drink, who trusted her own judgment in a situation that had no protocol. Ven Solaris sits with this for a long time. Then she opens a new file and begins writing. The title she gives it is preliminary and will change 3 more times before she submits it. The first version reads, Hypothesis: Human decision-making architecture operates on a fundamentally different risk calculation model than any currently cataloged civilization. Further investigation required. Urgency: high. She does not yet know how right she is. She does not yet know that urgency, high, is, looking back, the most spectacular understatement of her career. The Vol, for their part, answer Elena Vasquez's question. They explain the situation in full. The star. The timeline. The 60 years. The administrative process. The 7,214 rules. They send charts, projections, environmental surveys, population data, atmospheric requirements, everything a potential ally would need to understand the scope of what they are asking for. What they are asking for, Ven Solaris notes when the hegemony intercepts and decodes the data packet, is essentially everything. They need someone to advocate for their resettlement application within the hegemony's regulatory framework, using political capital and procedural knowledge that the Vol themselves no longer have, because 60 years of graceful decline have eroded both their institutional relationships and their leverage. They need a sponsor, someone to stand in the room and refuse to leave until the answer changes. Someone with exactly the combination of stubbornness, political naivety, and apparent immunity to social humiliation that might make such an effort viable. The hegemony's analysts, when they see what the Vol are asking for, privately agree it is impossible. The hegemony's analysts are incorrect, but Ven Solaris does not know that yet. At this point in the story, at this precise moment, what she knows is only this. Humanity has heard a signal not meant for them, decoded it, responded before any established civilization could organize a reaction, initiated direct communication with a dying species, and is now in possession of a full strategic brief on a resettlement crisis that the hegemony has spent 60 years quietly hoping would resolve itself without requiring a difficult decision. This is the moment she realizes the original question, how did they know the signal wasn't meant for them, is not the important question. The important question is what humanity is going to do with what they know. She does not have to wait long for the answer. 3 weeks after Elena Vasquez sends her 31-word message, a human delegation arrives at Hegemony Central, specifically at the Office of Territorial Assessment and Resettlement Adjudication, which has had the Vol's application in its inactive queue for 11 years. The delegation is 4 people. This is already strange. Hegemony member civilizations typically send delegations of no fewer than 40 when engaging with a regulatory body of this tier. The show of institutional weight is part of the process. It signals seriousness. It signals resources. It signals that the civilization making the request has enough personnel to sustain a long bureaucratic engagement. 4 people is not a show of weight. 4 people is barely enough to occupy a conference room. Ven Solaris reviews the footage afterward. She has standing access to monitoring records for human activity in hegemony spaces, and she watches the delegation arrive. Elena Vasquez is there, which surprises her, because Vasquez is a signals analyst and this is a regulatory proceeding. Alongside her are a man named James Okafor, listed in the human government's official documentation as a specialist in intractable negotiations. A woman named Dr. Priya Anand, whose background is in xenobiological environmental matching, and a very old man whose name is given simply as William Chen, whose listed role is advisor. The official record of William Chen's role within the human government is, when Ven Solaris tries to look it up, not exactly classified. It is simply not present. He appears in no directory. He has no department affiliation. He has no title. He is listed only as advisor, and before that, in records that go back 40 years, he appears briefly in connection with 3 separate diplomatic incidents, all of which involved situations where the expected outcome did not occur. She flags this, files it, returns to the footage. The four humans walk into the Office of Territorial Assessment and Resettlement Adjudication at the start of the official working day. The office has no appointment slot available for them. They had been told by automated system that the earliest available consultation was in 4 months. They sit down in the waiting area. They are still there at the end of the working day. They are still there the following morning. They bring food. They have brought sleeping materials. Elena Vasquez, at some point during the second night, appears to begin teaching James Okafor something using a flat board and small pieces that Ven Solaris eventually identifies as a human strategy game. William Chen sleeps, wakeful, then sleeps again, with the practiced economy of someone who has waited in many places. On the third day, a junior administrator approaches them and informs them that sitting in the waiting area overnight is not permitted under office regulations. James Okafor listens to this information politely. Then he asks, with what Ven Solaris's translation system categorizes as genuine curious interest, which specific regulation this falls under. The junior administrator tells him. Okafor nods. Then he asks whether the regulation applies to all waiting areas or specifically to the section where they are sitting, which is, technically, a transitional corridor rather than a designated waiting space. The junior administrator is not certain. Okafor says he is happy to wait while that is confirmed. They are still there on day 4. On the morning of day 5, the deputy director of territorial assessment, a Callith named Sorn Veth who has held his position for 22 years and has never once voluntarily altered his schedule for an unscheduled visitor, walks through the corridor where the humans are sitting. He stops. He looks at them. He looks at the small encampment they have established, the food, the sleeping materials, the flat board with the game pieces, the careful, orderly occupation of a transitional corridor in a regulatory building on the capital station of the hegemony of joined worlds. William Chen opens one eye. "You're the director," he says, not a question. "Deputy director," Sorn Veth says. "Close enough." Chen sits up. "We'd like 15 minutes. Later, Sorn Veth will tell colleagues he agreed because he was curious. This is accurate. He is also, Ven Solaris suspects, a little afraid not of the humans, but of what it means that they are still here. Every civilization that has ever engaged with his office has eventually exhausted its patience and withdrawn. The administrative process has been specifically designed, over centuries, to outlast the urgency of petitioners. It is a feature, not a flaw. These 4 humans have been sitting in his corridor for 5 days, and they do not look tired. They look like they just started. Sorn Veth gives them 30 minutes. The meeting record, which Ven Solaris obtains through channels she will not document, shows something she does not expect. She expects argument. She expects advocacy. She expects the humans to make the case for the Vol, the timeline, the star, the 60 years, the 7,214 rules, all the data the Vol sent them. Instead, Priya Anand places a single document on the table. "What is this?" Sorn Veth asks. "An environmental survey," she says. "We conducted it ourselves. There are 14 uninhabited worlds within hegemony-adjacent space that meet the Vol's biological requirements. We've ranked them by regulatory accessibility." She pauses. "The one at the top of the list, Meridian 7, has been administratively designated as pending assessment for the last 31 years. We checked. It hasn't been assessed." Sorn Veth looks at the document. "Pending assessment is a status designation that requires." "We know what it requires," James Okafor says. "We read the framework, all of it." He lets that sit for a moment. "Deputy Director, we're not here to argue about whether the process works. We're here because we found a path through the process that we think even you would agree is technically complete. We'd like your technical review of whether we've read the regulations correctly." This is, Ven Solaris will later write in her formal analysis, the moment the misinterpretation becomes visible. The hegemony had assumed, as it always does, that the humans came to fight the process. They had prepared to defend the process. Sorn Veth had a counter-argument ready. He had precedents. He had regulatory histories. He had the accumulated weight of 22 years of turning down petitions with impeccable procedural justification. He had not prepared for someone who had read all 7,214 rules and found the gap. The gap is real. Solaris sees it the moment she reads the survey. Meridian 7 has been in administrative limbo for 3 decades because the assessment was never completed, which means it cannot be formally designated as unavailable, which means its status is technically indeterminate, which means a resettlement application that specifically cites an indeterminate status world enters a different regulatory pathway, one that does not route through the standard rejection process. No one had ever tried this because no one had ever cataloged 14 candidate worlds and found the one with the longest standing administrative gap and framed the entire application around it. They did our bureaucracy's homework, Thresh Anav says when Solaris shows him. His respiratory membranes are pale again. They did it better than we do. They had 3 weeks, she says. He stares at her. Ina Vasquez received the Vol's data packet 22 days before this delegation arrived, she says. They read an alien regulatory framework in a language they barely know, identified a technical pathway that our own analysts have never found, conducted an independent environmental survey of 14 planetary candidates, and ranked them by regulatory accessibility. In 22 days, while holding another job, Thresh Anav is quiet for a long moment. Why? He finally asks. The Vol are nothing to them. They don't have a treaty. There's no trade relationship. There's no strategic benefit. Why would they? That, Solaris says, is the question I've been trying to answer for the last 6 years. She opens the Elena Vasquez file again. She reads the original 31 words again. We know what a message looks like when someone is hoping the wrong person hears it. She sits with it. Something tightens in her chest that her species would call pre-understanding, the sensation of an idea assembling itself at the edge of consciousness, not yet fully formed but already irresistible. She is about to understand something. She can feel it arriving. She does not know yet that understanding it will change everything she thought she knew about what humanity is. The Meridian 7 application moves through the alternative pathway in 4 months. It is not fast by any measure. But it moves, which by hegemony standards is extraordinary. Soren Veth reviews it personally. He passes it upward. It accumulates approvals with an efficiency that no one on the Vol resettlement file has seen in 60 years. During those 4 months, the humans do not leave. Not all of them, and not all the time. The delegation rotates. People go home and return. Elena Vasquez goes back to her night shifts and resumes her regular work. But there is always at least one human present at Hegemony Central, moving through the relevant offices, answering questions, filing supplementary documentation, having cups of hot beverages in corridors outside the rooms where decisions are being made. Solaris watches the footage compulsively. She begins to notice something. The humans are not lobbying. They are not threatening. They are not doing any of the things that civilizations typically do when they are trying to move a process forward. They are simply present, persistently, quietly, apparently inexhaustibly present. When a document requires a correction, they have the correction ready before they are asked. When a committee member has a question, they have already filed an answer with the committee's administrative office. They are not faster than the process. They work within the process, exactly at the process's speed, and they are there every single time the process requires something from them, without the gaps and delays that usually give a bureaucracy its opportunity to lose momentum. It takes Solaris 6 weeks to understand what she is watching. They are not fighting the system. They are not gaming the system. They are exhausting the system, but not the way she would have predicted, not by force or volume or political pressure. They are exhausting it by simply never giving it a reason to stop. There is no delay they don't close. There is no question they don't answer. There is no procedural requirement they don't meet, on time, correctly, completely. The system is designed to outlast urgency, and they have somehow converted urgency into something else, something patient and persistent, and crucially, something that does not have an end point. They are not trying to win quickly. They are trying to make it easier to approve than to continue not approving. Deputy Director Sorn Veth says something to a colleague on a channel Ven Solaris is not monitoring, but which reaches her through the informal networks that exist in any large institution. That becomes the thing she thinks about for years afterward. He says, I have dealt with 300 civilizations in 22 years. Every one of them eventually needed something from me more than they were willing to pay the cost of getting it. These humans, and here, according to the account she receives, he pauses for a long time. I do not think cost registers for them the way it does for us. The Vol resettlement is approved on a Tuesday. Ven Solaris learns this not from an official notification, but because Elena Vasquez sends a message directly to her research office. She has apparently been aware of the research file, which should concern Ven Solaris, but somehow doesn't. That says only, it went through. Thanks for keeping the record. Ven Solaris did not know she was keeping a record that anyone was aware of. She considers this for some time. Then she notices the timestamp on the message. Vasquez sent it at 3:14 in what would be, by human time cycles, the early hours of the morning. She is apparently awake in the middle of the night, sending a message to an alien archivist she has never met about an approval for a dying civilization she had no obligation to help. Ven Solaris types a response. She types several. In fact, she starts and deletes and starts again, which is unusual for her. She finally settles on a question. Just one. Why did you answer the signal? The response takes 40 minutes. She has almost given up expecting one when it arrives, because someone asked. Because they were careful about how they asked, they tried not to bother anyone, they aimed it at someone else, they made it small so it wouldn't be a burden. And when someone works that hard not to ask for help, it usually means they really need it and they're scared of what it costs to need it. I've been that scared. Most people have. You don't leave someone alone with that if you can help it. Ven Solaris reads it 3 times. Then she does something she has never done in a professional research file. She puts the message in the file and she writes underneath it in her own notation, this is the answer. This is the whole answer. Everything else is detail. She is right. But she is also, as she will learn shortly, catastrophically wrong about what the answer means. The Hegemony Security Council convenes a closed session 2 weeks after the Vol resettlement approval. Ven Solaris is not invited. She learns about it because Thresh Anav has a contact in the Administrative Support Division, and Administrative Support hears everything. What she learns is this: the Council is not discussing the Vol. The Vol case is closed, approved, moving forward. The Council is discussing humanity. Specifically, the Council is discussing what it means that a species that has been spacefaring for a little over 2 centuries managed to decode an encrypted alien transmission in 18 days, identify a regulatory gap in a framework they had no prior access to, navigate the most resistant administrative body in known space, and achieve in 4 months what the intended beneficiary had failed to achieve in 60 years. The Council's concern, which Ven Solaris thinks is almost correct but not quite, is that humanity is more sophisticated than previously assessed, that they have hidden capabilities, that the apparent simplicity of their civilization is a concealment, that behind the small delegations and the corridor encampments and the cups of hot drink there is something strategic, something orchestrated, something being managed from above by an intelligence that has understood the hegemony better and longer than it has revealed. This is a reasonable concern. It is the wrong concern, but Ven Solaris cannot tell them that yet. She cannot tell them because she has only just understood it herself, sitting at her desk at what is, by her own time cycle, the early hours of the morning, reading Elena Vasquez's message for the 4th time. I've been that scared. Most people have. You don't leave someone alone with that if you can help it. The Security Council is asking, what are humans hiding? The real question, the one that should actually frighten them, is, what if they aren't hiding anything? What if the human who answered the signal did it because she works night shifts and has good attention to detail, and has, at some point in her life, sent a message hoping the wrong person would hear it, and recognized the shape of that desperation when she saw it transmitted across the dark between stars? What if the 4 people who sat in a corridor for 5 days did it because they had read the file and understood the gap, and genuinely could not find a reason not to? What if humanity's answer to the question, "What do you want in return?" and here is where Ven Solaris's pre-understanding finally assembles itself completely, finally arrives, finally becomes a thought she can finish. What if the answer is simply nothing? Not nothing as a strategic position, not nothing as a concealment. Nothing as in, they have not yet learned to expect payment for this particular kind of action, because wherever they come from, the emotional calculus that says someone needs help and I can give it does not automatically route through the part of the mind that asks, what is my return on this? She thinks of the trading dispute. 11 hours for 40 credits. She had filed it as evidence of extreme persistence, possible irrationality, inefficient resource allocation. She pulls the file now and reads it with different eyes. The human trader had not been fighting for 40 credits. The trader had been fighting because the tariff was wrong, and the fact that it was wrong was, apparently, a sufficient reason to spend 11 hours correcting it regardless of the net value of the correction. She had read it as irrationality. It is not irrationality. It is a completely different relationship with the concept of worthwhile. She opens a new document. She types quickly now, because she is afraid she will lose the shape of it before she finishes. The hegemony's threat assessment model, she writes, assumes that all civilizations organize behavior around resource acquisition, strategic positioning, and risk-adjusted benefit. This model predicts that no rational actor will expend significant resources for zero measurable return. Humanity does not appear to have internalized this model. This is not because they are irrational. It is because they are operating on a benefit calculation that includes emotional and social variables that our model does not have fields for. A human will spend 11 hours correcting a 40-credit error, not because the credits are worth 11 hours, but because the error being wrong is, to them, a cost, and tolerating a known wrong is, apparently, more expensive to a human than fixing it. Applied to the Vol case, the human who answered the signal did not calculate benefit. She calculated burden. The Vol's situation was a burden she could partially relieve. She relieved it. The 4 humans who sat in the corridor did not calculate return on investment. They calculated how much it would cost to walk away. Walking away was more expensive than staying. They do not run toward reward. They run from the specific discomfort of knowing there is something they could have done and chose not to. This makes them. She stops typing. Looks at what she has written. Looks at the Security Council's concern, hidden capabilities, strategic concealment, sophisticated deception, and understands with sudden, awful clarity why the Council is going to keep getting this wrong. She finishes the sentence. This makes them functionally unstoppable in any situation where the rational response is to stop. She sends the document to the Council. She receives no reply. 3 days later, she receives a new assignment. She is to compile a full assessment of human behavioral patterns, strategic inclinations, military and diplomatic capability, and probable future intentions. The assignment is marked Priority Tier 1. It is the highest designation in the hegemony's assessment structure. It has not been used in 40 years. She accepts the assignment. She begins working. But first she sends one more message to Elena Vasquez. One question. Are there many humans like you? The reply this time is almost instant, as though Vasquez has been awake, or close to her communicator, or perhaps just ready for this particular question. Most of us, I think, we just don't always get the chance to notice. Ven Solaris will spend the next 4 years completing the assessment. It will be classified immediately upon submission. The Council will debate it for 6 weeks and then table it indefinitely, which is not a decision so much as the absence of one, which is, she has come to understand, how the hegemony handles information it does not have the framework to process. The Vol will begin resettlement of Meridian 7 within a year. A human environmental team, not requested, not paid, simply offered, assists with the initial atmospheric calibration, which Priya Anand has already modeled down to the seasonal variation patterns. The Vol elder who receives them at the first settlement site says something to Anand that the attending human translator renders as "We did not know what to make of you when you first replied." Anand apparently laughs and says, "Neither did we." The hegemony will open formal membership discussions with humanity within 3 years. The discussions will be long and complicated and frequently bewildering, for reasons that will be extensively documented elsewhere. Humanity will not simplify the process by being easy to deal with. They will simply be impossible to outlast. James Ackaffer will spend more time in more corridors. William Chen, the advisor with no department and no title and no entry in any directory, will sit in more waiting rooms with the patient economy of someone who has always understood that the only clock that matters is the one that runs out. Elena Vasquez will go back to her night shifts. She will intercept 2 more unusual signals in her career, and both times she will trust her own judgment, and both times the results will be significant, and both times the official record will describe the outcomes in language so measured it will read to future archivists like a weather summary. But Ven Solaris in the years after will return to one thing, not the regulatory breakthrough, not the decoded cipher, not the 5 days in the corridor or the 14-world survey or the Meridian 7 approval. She will return to the signal itself, the original Vol signal, aimed carefully away from any ears that were not meant to hear it, looped on a frequency the intended recipients never caught, beginning mid-breath as though the sender had been trying to speak for a long time before remembering to press record. She will think about what it takes for a civilization to send a message like that. 60 years of dying quietly, correctly, administratively. 60 years of the paperwork in the right order. 60 years of asking through channels and receiving rejections through channels and filing responses to rejections through channels. And at the end of 60 years, when the star is close enough on the timeline to feel personal, aiming a message sideways, not at power, not at authority, not at the correct recipients, but at a dead relay near a world where a species still young enough not to know the rules might happen to be listening. The Vol had not thought humanity would hear it. They had not thought anyone would hear it. It was not a strategic transmission. It was something much older and more basic, an exhalation of last resort hope, pushed outward not because it would work, but because silence had become worse than speaking. And on the 3rd planet of an unremarkable star, a woman working the night shift at the edge of human space had been paying attention, not because she was supposed to, not because the protocol said to, because paying attention was what she did, and because the signal when she heard it had the exact unmistakable quality of something sent by someone who had stopped expecting an answer. She knows that quality, she said. Most people do. Most humans do. That is the thing the hegemony cannot model, cannot classify, cannot assign to a threat tier or a capability assessment or a strategic intention matrix. It is not a weapon. It is not a tactic. It is something that lives in the space between a signal sent in the dark and a hand that reaches out, not because the math works out, but because there was never really a question about what you do when someone is out there in the dark and you can hear them. You answer. Not all civilizations answer. Most civilizations, with their 7,000 rules and their administrative queues and their 40-year-old pending assessments, do not answer not from cruelty, but because the calculus says the cost is uncertain and the return is unclear and the rational position is to wait. Humanity answers, not because they are brave exactly, not because they are stronger or smarter or equipped with something the galaxy lacks. They answer because somewhere in the long, complicated history of being human, the small planet, the difficult millennia, the 11 hours arguing over 40 credits, the messages sent hoping the wrong person would hear, they learned something about the dark that the hegemony, in all its 10,000-year procedural elegance, has quietly forgotten. The dark is not a reason to be silent. The dark is the reason to speak louder. Ven Solaris keeps the file open on her desk for years. The one that starts with the signal, the one that starts mid-breath, she never quite brings herself to mark it closed.